Hi and welcome to October First Time Film Watches 2023. So the last video came out a bit later than I anticipated because a few different things. My back was really hurting, I wasn't feeling good, and I just didn't have as much energy because I had been working a lot, but hopefully now I have the energy, I have the wherewithal to kind of keep back on the schedule that I've made for myself, and as with the last video, that I think I mentioned in it before, this is going to be a monthly basis video now. So this will come out this month, and then the next month I'll release November once that month gets through, and then we'll just go from there. So, hooray. Hi, Piper. Also, Piper might pop in via meowing or just when she shows up on the video. If she shows up on the video, who knows? I might hold her up to the camera, and you might have heard her just now. She's a bit curious. She doesn't come in this room very often because it's got a lot of cords and stuff that I don't want her to chew on, although she's been pretty good about not chewing on shit, knock on wood. Anyway, there are a lot of movies that I watched in the month of October, so I'm not going to waste any more time. We're just going to get right into it. The first one that I watched was Miss Congeniality with Sandra Bullock. It was directed by Donald Petrie. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't know. Petrie. What a last name. Anyway, this movie we watched on an airplane, Megan and I, when we were on our way to New Orleans, or from New Orleans. I can't remember. It's kind of a blur. This film is kind of shit, and I'm probably going to catch some flack for it, and here's why. Because it's one of those movies that is like deemed a classic, even though it's not necessarily a good movie in my opinion. The main character is one of the most unlikable characters that I think I've seen in a movie in a while. And her character is just very poorly written in terms of like trying to make you sympathize with her because she does everything wrong and because she's just totally unlikable. And I guess that maybe is kind of the point, but when your movie hinges on your protagonist being someone that you might be wanting to relate to, I don't think this is the right way to do it. And I'm just not a huge fan of Sandra Bullock overall. I think as an actress, she's kind of really one note. She's kind of good at playing like oblivious fish out of water type characters that have no idea what they're doing. Like, honestly, to me, she's almost just a slight step up from Melissa McCarthy in that way. And I don't think I've been able to take her really seriously as an actress in most things that I've seen her in. Probably the best one being Gravity, and she's just floating around in space going wah wah the entire time. It's kind of obnoxious. Anyway, this is also a comedy, so it hinges on you finding the things in the movie funny, and I mean it's amusing sometimes, and that's the most it ever gets because I don't know, it's just very safe, it's very bland. I feel like if this movie didn't have like a weird cult status around it, it would just be forgotten and that nobody would ever talk about it. But because it's got such a cult status, people are like, oh, Miss Congeniality. Movie's kind of shit, and I do not plan on watching the sequel because I feel like that's just going to be somehow even worse than this movie, and sequels that have Sandra Bullock in it are not my favorite type of thing. So Miss Congeniality, I'm giving a 3 out of 10. Kind of a garbo movie. We're going on to the next one. These next films I'm going to group together for sake of time and because they're all essentially under the same umbrella, that being Wes Anderson's The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, along with The Swan, The Rat Catcher, and Poison, the series of short films that he's released on Netflix this past year. And I really enjoyed them. I thought that they were pretty quaint. I really like the fact that this format seems to be one of my favorite things that Wes Anderson has done in the last few years with movies like The French Dispatch or Asteroid City. I feel like the script and the characters in those films, because they're so long, can wear thin for me. And I've complained about Wes Anderson's character writing before. It's not my favorite in a lot of his movies. I really like it in some of his movies like Moonrise Kingdom or Grand Budapest or The Darjeeling Limited, but when it comes to something like those 2 recent films that he's made, the feature-length ones, I just didn't get much from it in terms of the character writing or the diversity because they all sound like they're written by Wes Anderson. And I guess that's something that appeals to a lot of people, and I get it. Like, if you like that type of thing, that's awesome. but I'm just not feeling refreshed anytime I hear that sort of stilted, one-note, dry delivery dialogue. With The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, however, and the other 3 short stories that I mentioned, I feel like that lends itself to the perfect amount of time to get those sort of incremental stories and to kind of get something out of it that you probably wouldn't have otherwise gotten from one of his feature-length films, because it would have been diluted to fuck. But because this is so short, I really enjoyed this for what it was. And the short story specifically that I like, from best to worst, I would probably say I like The Swan the best. I think that The Swan was surprisingly touching and heartfelt and a little more serious than a lot of what Wes Anderson is used to doing, because he's used to doing more kind of lighter comedies with a bit of seriousness to it. But The Swan I was pleasantly surprised by, with just how quaint and heartfelt and sincere it was. And I feel like I don't really get that a lot from Wes Anderson, especially his recent works. So yeah, The Swan would probably be my number 1. That's an 8 out of 10. Number 2 is probably The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar itself. I think that it's a compelling 40-minute long short film. I think that it packs enough in there to give you the baseline information of what you're getting, while also still feeling like you're having a complete story. And I think that length for that story is really spot on. I don't think it was too long. It definitely wasn't too short. I probably could have used a little bit more, but I mean, I'm not going to complain about what I got, because I really enjoyed what I got. And I'm really sorry for my dying voice. I don't know what's going on. I sounded totally fine before I started recording, and now I just sound like I've been smoking 17 packs a day, but we're just going to keep rolling with it. So yeah, second place, Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. Third place, I would probably say Poison. I really like that one, and I really like Benedict Cumberbatch in that one, and he's great in the Henry Sugar one as well. I think as far as overall performances go, I think that Poison probably has one of the best ones in terms of like acting capability, especially when it comes to Benedict Cumberbatch in that short film. I think he's really compelling. I really like Dev Patel. Ben Kingsley's great. And then the last one, I would probably say The Ratcatcher. That one to me is a 7 out of 10, along with Poison, but I think that Ratcatcher to me felt a little bit more, I don't want to say lazy, but just low effort in terms of what the story he was trying to tell and the production value he was conveying, because in Henry Sugar and in The Swan, you get a lot of cool visualization with the story that's being told, because it's being presented to you in a way that the narrator is looking at you and telling you the story, almost breaking the fourth wall. And I really like when they kind of put that extra effort into the production design of actually giving them props and things to work with, and you have a good visual component to what's going on in the story. Whereas to a lesser extent Poison, and even to a greater extent The Ratcatcher, it kind of sacrifices some of that for miming, and you kind of have to picture the objects yourself, and it almost feels like you're watching an improv act. And I wasn't really a huge fan of that. I would have liked something a little more concrete when it came to the visuals of what was going on in the story. Not that I needed it to understand what was going on, but because I just think that it would have added another layer of effort into what I was viewing. Nevertheless, despite my complaints, I think that this collection of short stories based on Roald Dahl's book is really well done, really well made, and it's clearly something that Wes Anderson has a passion for. And I feel like in my lifetime sometime, he has to make an adaptation of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Like, it's just gotta happen. It's kind of surprising it hasn't already, but I guess we'll see. The world may never know. We may never see a Wes Anderson Willy Wonka movie. I feel like that'd be a crime if we didn't. But yeah, final scores for each story: Henry Sugar 8 out of 10, Ratcatcher 7 out of 10, The Swan 8 out of 10, Poison 7 out of 10. So highly enjoyable. I liked him quite a bit. Next up is Blackberry, directed by Matt Johnson. Now, I was aware of Matt Johnson from a podcast that I had listened to where they had him on as a guest, and they talked about his show, Nirvana the Band, the show. He's based out of Canada. He's kind of a smaller independent filmmaker, but he recently got the chance to make Blackberry, which is about the rise and fall of the Blackberry mobile phone. And it stars Jay Baruchel and Glenn Howerton. Jay Baruchel's kind of the sort of creative inventor type that kind of gets corrupted by the business side of it, and then Glenn Howerton plays, I think his name is Jim in the movie, where he is a little bit more outwardly aggressive, very strong personality, always dialed up to an 11 whenever you see him. And I think that the performances are the best part of this film. I think that Jay Baruchel is great, but I have such a soft spot for Glenn Howerton as this character, because I said it with the beta test and I'll say it again with this. I love watching characters being completely unhinged maniacs in settings where it's otherwise a normal environment. I think that comedy and dialogue and acting ability really can thrive off of that sort of thing, and I think that Glenn Howerton is by far the best part of this movie. Not that anybody else is bad. Even Matt Johnson's side character as Doug is really good and well acted, and Jay Baruchel's great, obviously, but Glenn Howerton just steals the show, and I could have used a lot more of him in this movie. I also like the way that the camera work was. It felt like it was like a slightly more high production value version of The Office, just a little more sleek looking, a little more clean looking, a little more dynamic, and obviously it's not supposed to look like a mockumentary, but it kind of has that feel to it where you're viewing these characters through like these panes of glass and like these windows and like these creaked doors. It's like you're a part of what's going on. You're there from the beginning, and I really like that dynamic that it has. I watched a movie this past month, Steve Jobs, we're going to talk about it on the podcast. It's going to come out in like a week or so, and or it's already been out, depending on when this video gets released. But a big complaint about that movie that I have is that it's not very cinematically dynamic, whereas something like Blackberry, I feel, has a little bit more going on in terms of the camera work and the production value, and I really respect it for doing that sort of thing. I also like the score of this movie too. I think that the subtlety of it works for the most part. I would have liked it to have been a little bit more impactful because it almost felt like it was too quiet sometimes, and I couldn't really get the cohesiveness of what they were going for with the music as far as their filmmaking process. But otherwise, I thought that the tunes themselves were appropriate and they weren't overbearing in any way. That's definitely not a complaint that I have about that. Not too much in the way of complaints. I just could have probably used a little bit more of this, and I would have loved more Glenn Howerton. As far as this film goes, in terms of like the actual story and the substance, I would say it's okay. It's well written enough, but it's not gonna be like the Social Network level dialogue or anything. It's very much just concerned with the situation and unfolding it, and the characters reacting to it accordingly, not really going too in depth with the characters themselves, not like the Social Network or anything. But this one I'm giving a 8 out of 10. I think it's really great, and I love Glenn Howerton to death. I will forever worship the golden god. Next up, I watched The Strangers on the same day that I watched Blackberry because I was on a Glenn Howerton kick and I heard that he was in The Strangers, and I was curious and I watched it, and I was, as far as his appearance goes, pretty disappointed because he's not in it much, and he's a very small ancillary part of the film. He's not even like a main character. I thought he was going to be one of the home invaders, but he's really not, and you don't get much from the home invaders anyway, but we're going to get into it. This movie kind of sucks. It's a horror film that stars Liv Tyler. It is directed by Brian Bertino, it looks like, and I don't even remember the male star who's in it, but basically Liv Tyler and her boyfriend or fiance or whatever are stuck in this like cabin thing, and they're being pursued by these 3 people in masks, and they're kind of terrorizing them, and it's based off a true story, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, the only thing that really is of any truthful merit is that some people were found dead in a house one time, and the rest of this movie just takes such creative liberties, and it meanders so much when it comes to the scares, the pacing, the overall tone of the film is just kind of whatever. Like it just shambles along like a zombie. It doesn't really do much in the way of trying to compel you with the characters in the situation, because the whole gist of it is, oh, this could happen to anybody. So instead of giving them like kind of real characters, they just thrust you into this situation they're in. They're like, hey, aren't they sad about what they're going through? Also, they're going to be terrorized. Don't you care about them? Not really. I really couldn't get attached to the characters at all. I really couldn't give a shit about what they were going through. There were some kind of visual choices and like cinematic moments that made it a little spooky, a little bit atmospheric, had some good build up to it, but otherwise it just kind of roamed around and didn't know where it was going to end up by the end of it. And it's a little too long, I will say. I think something like this could have been cut down a little bit shorter, and we would have had a bit more of a concise movie because of it. Not going to talk about The Strangers too much more. This one's a 4 out of 10. Very forgettable movie, some iconic imagery, and there is a bit of a funny part with Glenn Howerton that I'm not going to spoil, but it's kind of stupid. I wouldn't even bother with it. Maybe watch a review on it or something. Next up is The Creator, directed by Gareth Edwards. So Gareth Edwards directed Rogue One and this film. Gareth Evans directed the Raid movies. It's important for me to distinct those two because if you mistype one, you're going to find the other. So that's the information for you that I have as far as very similarly named directors that are currently working. But anyway, The Creator, it's a sci-fi film. It's got John David Washington. And first and foremost, this one I'm not going to touch too much on because podcast. And secondly, there isn't really much to say about this movie that people haven't already raved about with the visuals and the atmosphere and the tone. And a lot of the technical aspects of this movie are straight up fantastic. Like, there's no denying that visually this is one of the most stunning movies to come out in the past few years with the small amount of budget that it has. And I say small, it was $80 million, and that's money I'll never see in my fucking lifetime. But as far as like a big budget sci-fi high concept movie goes, that is a pretty small budget, and especially with how good this movie looks. I've seen movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania that were made for like $150 million, like almost double the budget of this film. And it looks like complete green screen trash compared to The Creator. It's really stunning what they managed to do with the visuals of this movie at the very least. Where the problem is the script and the acting and a lot of the characters. I think that John David Washington has yet to show me that he's a good actor. I don't think he's a bad actor necessarily. I just think that he has yet to really find what it is that makes him stand out, because to me, from Tenet and from this movie, he's one of the more bland leading men that I've seen in Hollywood out of a lot of what's already out there. Like, I can't even say he has the charisma of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson because he's kind of devoid of it. He's just a blank slate. He's kind of there. If you want a main character to kind of vicariously live through, I think John David Washington wouldn't be a bad pick. Just give him a little bit more personality to show his colors and to let him shine, because I don't think that he really has it quite yet when it comes to these big leading man roles that he's getting. And I can't help but think that maybe some of it is because his dad is Denzel Washington. I think he has the ability. I just think he needs to dig deep into himself and unlock it, and I would like to see something like that, and I have yet to see BlacKkKlansman, so maybe he'll wow me in that. But he's got potential, but I have yet to see it. And then all the other actors, I know that they're good. Like, Allison Janney's in it, and I know that she's a good actress, but for some reason she's just phoning it in. She plays like kind of the villain character. I think honestly the best actress in this is the little girl who plays the little AI baby robot thing. I think that she is probably the one who emotes the most. She's the most convincing out of all the performances in this film. And there's a lot of times when the characters are supposed to be showing strong emotions and you're supposed to be getting these powerful performances from these actors, and it's just not really hitting because the script is very weak and the performances are very underutilized. On top of that, the story's kind of cliche. It's not really anything too special. I don't think a sci-fi story needs to be the most unique thing. Like, not every movie needs to be Blade Runner 2049, but at least give us something that isn't quite as tropey and predictable and just cookie cutter as something like, I don't know, The Tomorrow War or something like that. A movie that is much worse than this, but something that the story is very similarly bland and straightforward to the point where it doesn't even offer anything too unique. It's introducing concepts that we learn about in Blade Runner and AI and all these different things, Ex Machina, but it doesn't really want to delve deep into it. It just kind of shows you the world of it for what it is and says, like, all right, here's this story that's taking place. It's not going to ask you any deeper questions about it. It's just going to kind of bring you through. It's almost like you're touring through the environment instead of actually learning about it. So yeah, The Creator, it's a 6 out of 10. I don't think it's a bad film by any means. Mac was a little bit harsher on it than I was, but I really do think that the technical aspects kind of elevate it past it being a bad movie, so I have to give it credit for that at least. Next up is The Deer Hunter. This is also one we talked about on the podcast. I watched this for the first time in October, and it's got Robert De Niro. It was directed by Michael Cimino, and I really liked it. I thought that The Deer Hunter is a great film that has a lot of iconic moments in it that really make make it unique, and I don't think there are many other movies that have been able to replicate it quite as bit. Well, hi Piper, are you feeling needy? I'm talking about The Deer Hunter. Do you want to chime in? What's your opinion on The Deer Hunter? I don't think she really got it. I don't even know if she was here when I watched it. I don't think she was. Were you here when I watched The Deer Hunter? She wasn't. It's okay. We'll catch it another time. Yes, so The Deer Hunter. I think that the performances are great. I think that Robert De Niro kills it. I think that Christopher Walken is really fucking good in it. And it's really interesting because I don't think I've seen a performance from a young Christopher Walken before. This is probably like the first movie I've seen him do below the age of 30. And he's really great. I really like the character he plays, and his acting is just haunting throughout the movie. And John Cazale's great. Rest in peace. I need to check out the 2 other movies of his that I haven't seen. Meryl Streep's good. I think that as far as the performances go, this is a very, very strong, satisfying movie to sit through because it is one of those films that is very long. It's 3 hours long. It can kind of run the risk of going a little bit too long in certain places, but it also feels like everything else is necessary. It feels like every scene is almost essential to what's going on, just that maybe they could have cut down on some of the time or some of the way that they lingered on the scenes. But overall, I think that it works, and I think that this film really stands on its own as like a sort of classic, just a drama. I think that this is one where if I check it out again, I think that I'll probably find some new things about it to really appreciate and delve into. But right now, The Deer Hunter I gave an 8 out of 10. Really good, really solid film. Definitely watch it when you have energy because it is a bit of a long film to sit through, but I think it's worth it overall. Next up is Alien Resurrection, directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet. I think I did my best. You can't say I didn't do my best. And this is the 4th film in the main series of the Alien franchise. Came out after Alien Cubed, which I, talked about in my last video. And yeah, it kind of sucks. The structure of it is really off and out of place. You're following these different characters, and I'm not going to spoil anything as far as the story, but the way that they have Sigourney Weaver in this movie is just really strange and such a bizarre choice to include her in the narrative this way, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it quite a bit. On one hand, it's creative and unique, but on the other hand, it's just so unlike the other movies before it. It's supposed to be like this unique thing that I don't think quite lands all the way. It's one of those that just feels kind of goofy and out of place, and there are certain lines. I think that Joss Whedon actually wrote this movie, which makes a lot of sense because she has so many lines in this that are just so questionable for a female-led character. Like, I think she says something at one point like, who do I have to fuck to get around here, or like whatever, or like what does she say, who do I have to fuck to get what I want around here, or something like that. It's just really fucking cringe dialogue. There's some side characters that are just way too goofy. The performances are really over the top. The guy in the wheelchair is unbelievably goofy, and then Ron Perlman in the film is just kind of a wacko. Just really bizarre, out of place performances. The movie's very visually ugly, which, I mean, it's kind of the point of Alien, but at the same time, it's just unappealing to look at. A lot of cheap effects, a lot of bad dialogue, a lot of really poor visuals to go with it. Very bland. The music is overbearing. Just didn't really care for this movie at all, and I'm not going to talk about it too much more. Alien Resurrection's a 3 out of 10. Next up, I watched Inside, starring Willem Dafoe, directed by Vasilis Katsoupis. Katsoupis. That is his last name. Confirmed. Anyway, this film, I was curious about. I had seen previews for it in the theater, and I think I watched a trailer online. It's basically Willem Dafoe is an art thief, and he is stealing these paintings in this guy's penthouse apartment when all of a sudden the security system activates and he's locked inside and he can't get out. And this is a good entry, I would say, into the Willem Dafoe loses his mind series of films, because I think that this whole movie is hinged on his performance. I think that he is the best part, and I think he's the most compelling part, and I think there's a reason why they chose him to play this character in the way that he does, because he nails the absolute weird energy that it takes to pull something like this off, the absolute depraved, kind of crazy depths that this character and this type of character needs to go, and I think that he absolutely nails it. As far as the rest of the film goes, it's visually nice to look at. I would say that the cinematography is like the second best thing about it, because it's a setting that lends itself to a lot of artful sets and interesting visuals overall. As far as I believe this film goes. I think that it does as good of a job as it can do with the visuals and presents it in a way that is interesting. The biggest thing with this film is the pacing. I think that it is spread out way too long. I think that the overall point of it is driven home about halfway through, and you don't really need to sit through the rest of it in order to get anything more from it. I think that as far as the pacing of this, it's pretty weak overall. It definitely could have been shortened down. And I also think that it gets pretty repetitive after a while, and that's also in relation to the pacing. After a while, you're just kind of waiting for this to be done, and then the ending is a little unsatisfying for me. Where it ends up is one of those things where I don't think it really earns the ambiguity that it strives for towards the end of the film when in relation and when looking back to the rest of the movie previously. I don't think that type of storytelling was justified in happening that way. But I don't think it's a bad movie. I don't think it's one that I hate. I definitely like it. It's just one that is heavily flawed, and I think could have been edited down into a better movie in there somewhere. But I really like Willem Dafoe, and it's visually great, so it's got some value there in terms of the presentation and the performances. Also, the soundtrack was kind of forgettable. I don't really remember too much from it, so I guess that's neither a good thing or a bad thing, just kind of whatever. So inside, I give a 6 out of 10. Next up is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, directed by David Fincher. It's got Brad Pitt, Cate Blanchett, and it's about a little baby boy who's born an old man. He's going in reverse, baby. Speaking of little baby, Piper's right here again. So going through David Fincher's filmography, this was one that I wasn't really dreading, but it was one that I was kind of hesitant to really jump into because it is a longer film. It's almost 3 hours, and it is a little bit different from the type of film that David Fincher kind of lends himself to, which is more so like a thriller, kind of creepy serial killer mystery unfolding atmospheric vibe. And this is based on an F. Scott Fitzgerald, I think, short story, and it's very naturally whimsical. It's got heart. It's got a lot of like kind of feel good, strong emotional moments to it that you don't really get from a cold, isolated David Fincher film where the characters are supposed to be depraved. This is very much a, oh, look at how nice these people are type of thing. But I enjoyed it, and I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I thought that this one was going to drag on for longer than it needed to, but I think that the length is absolutely justified when it comes to telling someone's entire life story, basically the way they tell Brad Pitt's story in this, Benjamin Button. I really like the framing of this, as it reminds me of Big Fish, the Tim Burton film, where Ewan McGregor plays like the younger version of the dad, and it's kind of going through the events of his life and like where it leads him to. And I think that this movie is sort of a good companion piece to that, where it's a lot of like kind of fantastical elements told within the framing of a real story that took place. And obviously this is, you know, based on a fictional story, but the way that it presents it is very much grounded in realism to the point where you can relate to a lot of the things going on. And I really like the way they frame it with Brad Pitt as this character that goes through these people's lives and he kind of affects them in certain ways, and meanwhile he himself is a character enough to serve as the central figure for the story. Hey, ho, no, you go down here, little missy. Apologies for the Piper jump scare if you saw her. She's not allowed on the table. As far as the technical aspects, this movie is pretty compelling too. Some of the special effects work is a little dated as far as, you know, Benjamin Button goes, because they have to put so much makeup on Brad Pitt, and the makeup's pretty good, but there's a lot of also like special effects stuff going on that hasn't quite aged that well, but it didn't really take me out of the movie too much. It's just something that I have to know. And then I think Cate Blanchett's old age makeup is really good. I think it's probably one of the best age makeup that I've seen in a movie since I'm Thinking of Ending Things or something like that, where it's just really well done and meticulously put together. And I think that the performances justify it too. You kind of believe Cate Blanchett as this old lady that's laying in a hospital bed dying during Hurricane Katrina. So yeah, really good film. I was surprised I liked it as much as I did, and I'd give Benjamin Button a 6 out of 10. Next up is Over the Garden Wall, directed by Nate Cash, and it's an animated short series, limited series that I watched on Hulu with my girlfriend, and it was really, really great. I think that overall, as far as the The tone of it is really comfortable. It's very cozy. It's one of those shows that I could see myself watching again next year as like a yearly thing. And I really like the voice acting. Elijah Wood and Melanie Linsky are great. I really like Back to the Future guy. Why am I blanking on his name? I'll pop it on screen. It's one of those guys who like I should know. I should know his name. What the fuck is his name? What is his name? Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. Christopher Lloyd. Yeah, Christopher Lloyd's good too. I could not fucking figure out Christopher Lloyd's name. Why? But yes, back to Over the Garden Wall. Very greatly animated, very quaint, very good animated series that I think most people of all ages could probably enjoy. Probably like ages like 10 to, you know, however old you are when you're watching this video. You could be 67 and enjoy it probably. It's one of those things where each episode is kind of its own thing and then it progresses into a greater narrative that has enough depth to justify it, but also is not the most overbearing thing that you can watch in a show like this. Yeah, not too much in the way of complaints for this. I think that this is one I could easily see myself watching again in a year or so and getting about the same amount of enjoyment out of it and maybe even a little bit more. So yeah, Over the Garden Wall, I give a 9 out of 10. Really fucking great animated show. Next up is Mank, directed by David Fincher. This is one of the last movies that I think I needed to watch in David Fincher's filmography before I had seen all of them. And this one was unique, to say the least. It's probably the most different out of all of his filmography that he's made up to this point, because it's a period piece about Herman Mankiewicz. It stars Gary Oldman and him writing the script for Citizen Kane. And I kind of wish I had seen Citizen Kane before I watched this movie, because I feel like there's some context that I'm probably missing from not watching the actual Citizen Kane film. And as someone who is a movie boy, it's one of the cardinal sins I know that I'm committing by admitting that I haven't watched that movie, but fuck you, who cares? Strongest thing about this, much like something like The Deer Hunter, is the performances. I think that as far as Mank goes, Gary Oldman kills it. I mean, he's known as the chameleon for a reason. He can slip into any role and you believe it. And he's really compelling, really well written. I really like the overall writing of this. And I guess the screenplay was written by David Fincher's dad. I don't remember his exact name. Maybe I'll pop it on screen. But I guess David Fincher's dad wrote this years and years ago, and then he passed away, and David Fincher's been trying to get this movie made since like the early 2000s. And it came out 2021. I think that the writing is witty enough to kind of stand on its own and be something that you point to as a unique element of this film. It feels like Herman Mankiewicz always has a quip. He always has something to say, something quick and witty and cunning in response to any particular character in this film, and that kind of just carries throughout the entire thing and is a through line throughout the whole narrative. As far as the story and pacing itself, it kind of suffers a bit the further it goes along. You're kind of wondering when this is going to wrap up. It really hinges on the fact that you have to care about Herman Mankiewicz as a character in order for everything to kind of make sense and to justify watching the entire movie. And this is, I think, where the context of watching Citizen Kane would have come in handy, because I could have related to a little bit more of the side characters and everything going on with them, and it makes you aware of the different sort of behind the scenes happenings of what was going on with MGM and the president there at the time and the different political issues going on. There's like it kind of reminds me of Oppenheimer a little bit. There's like a weird political angle to this movie, and if I watch it again, maybe I might appreciate it more, but some of that stuff was just kind of lost on me, and I was wondering what exactly the point of it was when we're following this specific character and his eccentricities. But I think it's a good movie overall. It's just one that I think I need to warm up to more. Maybe if I ever check it out again, which I'm not in a super big hurry to do, admittedly, it might be one of those things that maybe I'll get something out of, and if I check out Citizen Kane before then, hopefully that'll help even further. But for right now, Mank is a pretty solid 7 out of 10. It's a good movie overall, just got some pacing issues and some things that I really couldn't connect with too much. Next up is Dead Man's Shoes. Not going to talk about this one too much. Podcast. This is directed by Shane Meadows, and I was very pleasantly surprised by this. This is a film that I'd never heard of before that Mac recommended we watch, and I immensely enjoyed it for what it was. And it's one of those films where you kind of have to take into account the small budget that went into it. You have to reasonably set your expectations for the production value and the sound quality and the different technical aspects going on. And it's one of those films that in concept and in execution I think works well for the type of grounded story that it's telling. First of all, the performances I think are really well done. I think that Paddy Considine is amazing in this movie. He's a very kind of brute force, almost like a British Punisher type character, where he's getting revenge on these guys for tormenting his brother while he was away at war. And it's funny because I recognized him, but I didn't think he was Paddy Considine. I thought he was Ray Spalf, or whatever his name is, the other guy from Hot Fuzz. They both play like the mustache detectives in that movie, which, you know, it's kind of an amusing thing to bring up, because I got him mixed up, but there's a reason I got him mixed up, is because they do look similar. But he's great. I think that Toby Kebbell kills it. I think that he perfectly balances the ability to play someone with a mental disability without it being too cartoonish or offensively bad. I think that he absolutely nails it, and you know, it's one of those roles that's hard to pull off if you aren't already dealing with something like that as an actor. So just very impressive performances overall. I liked the cast of bad guys, the scumbag drug dealers that abuse the brother. I think that they were really fun to see. There's some things towards the end of this film that kind of lose me a bit. The sort of last 20 minutes of it, I feel like could have been done a little bit more effectively different, and I get what they were going for, and I'm not going to give anything away, but it's one of those things where it feels like the end of the movie happens 20 minutes before the movie actually ends. And I think that with the way it was structured and the way that they went about it, it could have been handled in a bit of a different way. Maybe if I watch it again, I'll turn around on it, but right now it's probably the weakest part of the film for me. Otherwise, Dead Man's Shoes was surprisingly compelling, reminded me of Nicholas Winding Refn's Pusher trilogy, just the way that it was shot in a very grounded, almost documentary style way, and just following these scumbag characters doing scumbag things. So Dead Man's Shoes, I give an 8 out of 10. Really solid, really good. Next up, Fateful Findings. That's a 10 out of 10. What do you want me to fucking say? Watch it yourself. Don't even, watch the movie before we talk about it on the podcast. Just check it out. It's free on YouTube. It's one of the best movies ever made. Go see it now. Next up is Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese. We're going to talk about this on the podcast that we're about to record today. And, you know, I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I don't want to give too many of my thoughts away right here, but I thought it was really good. It's one of those films that I had to let sit for a while because it is very long. It is one of the longer movies I've seen, especially in a theater, and it's about 3.5 hours. I have yet to see The Irishman. I need to knock that out of my list sometime soon, but it's just a daunting task spending an entire day watching a 3.5 hour movie. And first of all, the performances, really fucking great. I think Lily Gladstone is probably the standout of this movie, and while her performance isn't quite overly bombastic or expressive or out there, I think that what they have her do in this film is so compelling and gut-wrenching and really fascinating to see. I think that I would be very surprised if she didn't get at least nominated for supporting actress in next year's Oscars. If they happen with the fucking actor strike, who knows. Leonardo's great, Robert De Niro's great. I think that all the performances are really solid and they live up to what the writing kind of calls for their characters to do. This, out of Martin Scorsese's filmography, kind of reminds me a lot of Wolf of Wall Street, and not just in terms of like the length of the film and the fact that Leonardo's in both of them, but the fact that it's one of those where you're focused on these characters and they're all kind of scummy and you're wondering what ultimately it's going to lead to, and where it does lead to is very compelling and interesting, but at the same time, because the movie's so long and because it's so thorough with everything that it's showing you, you're often left wondering when it's going to get to the point. When is this going to hit the place where it needs to? Because throughout the film, it kind of risks being repetitive. It's one of those where similar types of scenes are happening over and over and over again, and you're just wondering when it's going to crescendo into something that you can get some level of catharsis from. I'm not saying everything is repetitive, it's just that it's a lot of misery. It's a lot of brooding, overbearing sadness that is throughout the entire film that kind of makes you feel hopeless, and that's all well and good, and I'm a fan of that sort of stuff in films. I think that it's compelling and unique to see that sort of thing told in this type of medium, but it's also one of those things where you have to ask yourself, is this going to get to the point anytime soon? Is this going to drag on a little too long? And do we really need to see another scene like this? Music's great, visuals are stunning. Martin Scorsese absolutely knows what type of movie he wants to make, and I think that, yeah, this one's really good overall. I didn't like love it, but it's one of those things that I could maybe see growing on me, especially when I talk about it with more people who have also seen the film. So yeah, Killers of the Flower Moon, long-awaited film, filmed in 2018, finally fucking came out 5 years later. Really good. 8 out of 10. We got 2 more films. I had to flip the page because I had watched so many movies this month. Next one, Five Nights at Freddy's, directed by Emma Tammy, and this is based off the video game. It stars Josh Hutcherson. He's like a security guard who is looking after his little sister, and he's got to make money because he can't hold a job, and he starts working at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. This film is kind of garbage. I didn't really like it at all. It's one of those films that is going to be notorious because critics hate it and fans of the game and the property and the franchise really love it. It's kind of like the Mario movie that way. I just can't get over how many flaws this film has. First of all, it's very fucking repetitive with the flashback scenes. Every time they cut back to it, it's like, god damn it, this fucking shit again. This doesn't matter. This is stupid. The Veronica character is one of the most poorly written characters I've seen in a movie. She'll act one way in one scene and then another way in another scene, and it doesn't make any fucking sense with her character and how she's set up and her involvement in the story. Matthew Lillard's fine. He's hamming it up. Josh Hutcherson I didn't think was terrible. It's just that his character, any character really isn't that well written at all. The villainous ant character is really goofy, and I had a hard time just logically trying to think about the events and how they unfold with this movie and the consequences the characters are supposed to be going. Like, towards the end of the film, you have so many more questions and answers of like, wait, what about this character? What about this fucking event? Like, what happens when people find this? Like, this is so stupid. I do like some of how they used a little bit of the special effects sometimes. Like, it looked okay. You could tell that there were actual like suits or animatronics on set, but at the same time, some of them did look kind of cheesy and bad and dumb. As far as a horror movie goes, it's not really scary. There's some surprising parts to it as far as like certain kills that you see on screen for a PG-13 movie, but you know, they want kids to go see this because it is popular with children, so they're like, we gotta water the fuck out of this thing. We gotta water it down to bullshit in order for people to go and see this movie for us to make $2 billion, baby. Luckily, I watched this on Peacock, so I didn't have to fucking pay for it. Yeah, Five Nights at Freddy's, more like Five Nights at Farties, because it's a fucking 3 out of 10. Last movie I watched in October was Upgrade, directed by Lee Wannell, and it stars some fucking guy, I forget his name. Follows this guy in this futuristic setting, and he suffers an accident that leaves him paralyzed, and then he has the chance to walk again with this upgrade. That's where the title of the film comes from. And this movie is really surprisingly fun. I think that it's definitely not a perfect movie. It's one of those films that is very cheesy and over the top, but it kind of needs to be with the premise and the setting and everything going on. It's a lower budget film, but it looks great. It sounds great. I think that it knows its limitations, and as far as like a compelling sci-fi narrative action revenge movie, I think it works overall. It kind of has a tone that hits that sweet spot for me of like a sort of cyberpunk action sci-fi thriller film. And I think the main actor, I'll put his name on screen, I don't remember off the top of my head because he's not like the most famous guy. I think his name is Logan Marshall Green. I think he's really good in it. I like his performance. This movie feels like the type of movie that Tom Hardy's Venom wanted to be, where it's this guy who doesn't really have control over his actions but sort of learns to embrace it overall throughout the film, and he becomes like a fucking badass throughout the whole thing. And I feel like where Venom missed a lot of those opportunities and to kind of hit that nail on the head, I think that this movie absolutely substitutes all of it and works as well as it can with a premise like that. I think that the acting overall is impressive enough. It didn't really like blow me away. It's not one of those stories or performances that you're gonna be left talking about and be like, oh yeah, this person was really good in Upgrade. Like, it's not gonna be one of those. It's gonna be one of those where you're gonna think about the concept and the action scenes and the technical aspects that went into this movie rather than the story elements or the performances. It's almost like an inverse of Killers of the Flower Moon, except maybe Killers had a little bit more going for it overall as a well-rounded movie. But I think that Upgrade is a very solid movie to check out. It's short. It's got some things going for it that I think if you like sci-fi action films, you'll at the very least get something out of it that not a whole lot of them offer in terms of quality. So Upgrade, I'm giving an 8 out of 10. I'd probably say it's closer to a 7 than a 9 for sure, but it's one of those where I feel comfortable enough with the rating to really stand behind the score of this film. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for Upgrade. Really solid film. And that is it for the October First Time Film Watches 2023. Thank you guys so much for checking this out. I know that the last video came out a little bit later than usual, but hopefully this one will be a little more streamlined. I've got a little bit more energy when talking about these movies, and I'm kind of back in my own little weird headspace that I've kind of made for myself when presenting myself on camera to you guys when talking about these films. So November film watch video will come out sometime in December. No real set schedule. It'll probably release on a Sunday that an episode of the podcast doesn't release, and I'll work to get this out to you guys as soon as I can. Appreciate you guys watching. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, that would be awesome. I'd appreciate seeing those numbers. Be sure to check out the podcast for whatever movie discussion you want us to talk about or to hear our thoughts on. There's probably something out there for you if you look deep enough, and who knows, maybe we'll surprise you. But check out the other videos. I have reviews. There's something that I have an idea cooking up for that I might announce at some other time, but for right now I'm going to keep it a secret just in case it doesn't come to fruition for some reason. And hopefully you guys look forward to the next video. Thank you so much. Bye.